The Federal Reserve just revealed their plan to ban Bitcoin and print money forever. Today, we reveal why Bitcoin is the biggest threat to their unlimited deficit problem. With trust in government and the establishment reaching all-time lows, the markets and the world are looking to put their trust in new leaders and new systems. The cracks are starting to show, and the Federal Reserve is running out of time to stop Bitcoin. We discuss why you need to protect yourself from debasement and from a system that doesn't have your best interest in mind. Let's get into it. Welcome to Bitcoin Simply with Dante Cook, where I help you to understand macro and markets in a simple way. Subscribe to the channel if you already haven't. We put out content 6 days a week. Let's go. When the Federal Reserve says what they want to do out loud, believe them. In a recent paper called The Unique Implementation of Permanent Primary Deficits, the Federal Reserve of Minneapolis doubled down on their take that Bitcoin is useless, yet they mentioned it 110 times in their paper. They made it very clear that Bitcoin is a threat. It's a threat to their ability to create continuous and permanent deficits. Here's what they had to say. If there is Bitcoin in trade, then there is no continuous Markov strategy for the government that leads to unique implementation. Get this. They even talked about wanting to potentially ban Bitcoin. A legal prohibition against Bitcoin can restore unique implementation of permanent primary deficits, and so can attacks on Bitcoin. You can't make this up. They want to ban or tax Bitcoin so that they can continue to fund unlimited deficits forever. The Federal Reserve strategy is plain and simple. They put it right in the very first sentence. The government can uniquely implement a permanent primary deficit using nominal debt and continuous Markov strategies for primary deficits and payments to debt holders. Without debt, there is no system. And without continually creating more debt, the system implodes on itself. And that's precisely why Bitcoin is the #1 threat to the federal government right now. It's the only asset that exists outside of the existing financial system that can't be manipulated. When you look at asset prices, you finally come to the realization they are going to go up forever, and they have to always go up. And it's not because they're more valuable. It's because the value of the dollars that they're being measured in are becoming worth less. The S&P 500 is up over 23% year to date. Gold is up 32% year to date and is about to have its best year since 2007. Silver is even outperforming gold, up over 45% year to date, having its best year in over 12 years. Federal Reserve Chair Neil Kashkari of Minneapolis said that Bitcoin is useless. And in a recent interview yesterday, he admits what people don't realize is actually going on about prices and inflation. Prices will never come back down.
We cannot bring prices back down across the whole economy. To bring prices back down across the whole economy, we would basically need to have an economy that's shrinking. And nobody wants an economy that's shrinking. What we can do, and what we are on process of doing, is stop prices from climbing quickly from here. So we're on our way back. Inflation is running right now, depending on how you measure it, kind of in the mid to high 2s on an annual rate. And we need to get it all the way back down to 2%. But we're making good progress over the last few years. It's come way down. But mid to high 2s is still climbing. It's not going back to what it was in 2019. And that's just a fundamental disconnect. So that when I say, hey, we're making good progress on inflation, you might look at me and say, what are you talking about, buddy? And we're both right, because I'm talking about the change going forward, and most people are saying, yeah, but I remember what prices were like 5 years ago, and they're not even close, and you're right.
And notice how Kashkari says, depending on how you measure it, inflation's in the mid to high 2s. Well, we know that's depending on how you measure it. People who pay for things in the real world aren't having that same experience.
My issue was more the energy. I've been paying $2,100 since I first opened up. In the last 7 months, it shot up to $15,000.
The United States government has created $473 billion in debt in the last 3 weeks. Interest payments on the debt are now at $1.2 trillion. And the U.S. budget deficit is now 6.3% of GDP. In an interview on CNBC this morning, legendary investor Paul Tudor Jones believes that our deficit is much greater than the CBO is even predicting. He believes that it'll be over 200% by 2034. We've seen what happens when debt levels get to these sorts of places in markets before, like Japan. Their debt to GDP has gone from less than 100% to over 250% since 1997. And their economy has been completely stagnant since the 1990s. And their debt to GDP levels were right about where our debt to GDP levels are today. And this is what the value of their currency, the yen, looks like when compared to a harder currency, the United States dollar. And this is exactly why everybody wants to move away from the United States dollar. And today, they're having that BRICS meeting that we talked about a few weeks ago, where Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are meeting to discuss a new currency outside of the US dollar trade system. They've been stockpiling gold reserves and have been talking about building their own unique system that trades outside of the dollar. But it's not logical. And here's why. The hardest asset in the world is available and globally accessible for all countries to use today, and that's Bitcoin. It ties money to the currency of the universe, energy. Check out this recent interview with Natalie Brunell and Charles Payne.
They're saying that Henry Ford actually predicted Bitcoin. He talked about replacing gold with an energy currency. By the way, he also said it would stop wars. So your thoughts on this?
The Henry Ford thing is fascinating. I mean, he essentially understood 100 years ago that if you fix the money, you can fix the world, Charles. And he lived through World War I, and I think he saw the manipulation that happened on what was supposed to be the gold standard. He saw that gold can easily be monopolized by powerful bankers and global elites to essentially fund endless conflicts through inflation. And he believed that energy, which no one can print or manipulate, could instead serve as this stable and peaceful foundation for a world currency. And that's exactly what Bitcoin offers. It redefines money and ties it to the currency of the universe, which is energy. And by dematerializing wealth, it introduces the incentive for peace and cooperation because there's nothing physical to conquer. So I think Ford would have definitely been a Bitcoiner.
Gold incentivizes more corruption and more attacks, not less. But Bitcoin guards nation states and individuals like us through encryption. There is no amount of brute force that can enable someone to get access to your Bitcoin if you properly secure and store it. And this is why I encourage so many people to head over to thebitcoinway.com. They are the leader in Bitcoin self-custody, cybersecurity, and privacy so that you can protect your Bitcoin against attacks like these. Connect with a one-on-one specialist so that you can learn and master the skills needed and necessary to leverage all of the benefits that Bitcoin has, mainly encryption, privacy, and it being freedom money, not just number go up technology. Head over to thebitcoinway.com and schedule a meeting with their team today. All right, back to the peaceful coordination of activity. That's ultimately the goal of what they're looking to get out of the BRICS summit today. They're looking for the ability to peacefully trade and coordinate globally through something outside of the United States dollar. And I believe that Bitcoin is our best hope for this. Back to Natalie.
The role of hope in the future that, maybe even with human rights. I know you talked about maybe stopping or eliminating wars. Could it really be that impactful?
Bitcoin addresses the biggest global economic and political challenges that we face. I mean, it's a hedge against and also the solution to currency debasement and protects all of us from governments just printing money and destroying our savings. It's decentralized and this non-sovereign asset that no one controls, which shifts financial power away from authorities who people trust less and less in favor of the individual, and it's a real alternative to fiat currencies that will always be manipulated for political gains. And if you do care about human rights, it's a tool for financial inclusion, offering billions of people around the world access who are excluded from the traditional financial system and capital markets. And I think all of this will help reduce some of the geopolitical conflict and tensions that we have, because it creates a parallel system we can all peacefully opt into, underpinned by a neutral, apolitical, universally accessible store of value. And that's why I think promoting Bitcoin is the most noble crusade.
Bitcoin is not only better for the world than gold, but it's also going to continue to eat into the market cap of gold. VanEck CEO says that he believes that Bitcoin will reach 350K or at least half of the market cap of gold.
About a year ago, started pounding the table because eventually the Fed is going to start easing here. That's great for gold and that's for Bitcoin. What I said is Bitcoin is growing up and will be eventually half the total market cap of gold.
He did this interview back in September and he was bullish on his call. ETF flows are accelerating. And just yesterday, BlackRock's IBIT took over third place as the largest traded ETF in the world, not just out of Bitcoin ETFs. It's less than a year old, people. And Bitcoin is having its fifth worst year since 2010, and it's still up over 50% year to date. Whales are accumulating, and the Bitcoin halving, remember that thing that we had earlier in the year? is about to actually kick in. The typical bull run starts 170 days after the Bitcoin halving, and it tends to peak about 480 days after the Bitcoin halving. And we're 180 days out from the Bitcoin halving. Let's hit this one final quote from Paul Tudor Jones in his recent interview with CNBC this morning, where he said that all roads lead to inflation.
All roads lead to inflation.
But does all roads lead to inflation, therefore gold is a good investment? Is Bitcoin a good investment to you?
I'm long gold. I'm long Bitcoin. I think commodities are so ridiculously underowned. So I'm long commodities. I think most young people find their inflation hedges via the NASDAQ. That's also been great. It's probably some combination. I probably have some basket of gold, Bitcoin, commodities, and NASDAQ, something like that. And I would own zero fixed income.
The trade's not very hard. Don't ignore reality. Like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and the Ravens offense, nothing stops this train right now. If you want to navigate your Bitcoin journey in community, join Columbus at joincolumbus.com, the only online Bitcoin digital community out there. And with that, this is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy stacking.